All right, welcome everybody around the world. Welcome to all my subscribers. This will be a short video because I don't have time right now. Maybe later tonight I can make a longer video. But I just want to let everybody know that on my channel right now, about a year ago, I made a few videos on topics pertaining to First Enoch. One or two of them are very long videos, like about an hour and a half, where I go through some tremendous evidence for First Enoch. That's where I read the quotes, the verses, this and that there. So I have one video, and this is related to what I'm going to talk about now. That's why I'm mentioning it. But I have one very long video where I go through it. This took a mega study to discover all this, and I don't think anybody else in the world has discovered this because I looked high and low and couldn't find anybody talking about it. But I made an epic discovery that in the book of First Enoch, many things that are said in the book of First Enoch are actually quoted by numerous books of the whole Bible. That includes Tanakh, not just New Testament. In fact, there's more quotes in the Tanakh that come from First Enoch than quotes that the New Testament uses from First Enoch. Many different books. I can't remember if it's every single one of the Tanakh books, but a majority of the Tanakh books, or a lot of them, quote from First Enoch, and it's quite astounding. And in that video, I go through, as part of that study, I go through the verses from the book of Daniel, which quote First Enoch. Now, that's what I'm going to focus on here today. Okay, so First Enoch can be logically proven to be older than the book of Daniel, okay, or at worst case scenario, contemporary, although that is logically less likely, as I'll explain. But at worst case scenario, it was contemporary to the book of Daniel when the book of Daniel was actually written. Okay, and if we want to look at it, and welcome. If we look at, there's two avenues we can look at this from. A believer, whether you're Jewish or Christian, you would believe that the prophet Daniel, or Daniel, wrote the book of Daniel, which would put it like 500 or 600 BC or whatever. But if you're one of the hardcore skeptical scholars who look at, evidence and not just belief, they would say, well, the oldest copies that we have or fragments are from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they date it between 1 and 300 BC. Okay, and I cover this in my longer video. But the important logic here is as follows. As I, in greater detail, cover in my other video I keep referencing, I just felt after a year it's important to bring this topic up again, right? So in short form, the book of Daniel uses many certain key terms, which are only found in the book of Daniel. Okay, now Judaism believes the book of Daniel to be canon. Okay, so for you, even for Judaism, I think they would be able to follow the logical steps I'm about to show, right? So the book of Daniel is canon. The book of Daniel contains many specific phrases, terms that we only find in First Enoch. We do not find these terms or phrases anywhere else in the Tanakh, okay? Such as the names of certain angels, Michael, Gabriel, okay? Revealing the names of angels is not found anywhere else in the Tanakh, but Daniel did write such in his book, okay? Next thing I want to quickly mention, the term Ancient of Days. This only occurs in the book of Daniel and in First Enoch. These are just two examples, right? I can't remember how many more examples I gave in my longer video, but it's well worth watching everything because, like I said, I go through all the other Tanakh books that quote First Enoch. But here, focusing on Daniel, because of that factoid that I just showed, right, that these key phrases are only found in Daniel and in First Enoch, we can logically ascertain that if Daniel is a canon book, then when the book of Daniel was written, whether it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 600 BC, in that range, to please the skeptics, the skeptic scholars, and the believers, right? We'll give it that range, 1 to 600 BC. If the book of Daniel is canon and was written whenever it was within that time frame, the fact of the matter is that since it is considered as canon, then, and the prophecies have come true, right, historically and all that, but since it is canon, then that means that for Daniel to be a legitimate prophet or scribe or whatever you want to call him, because Judaism doesn't like to call him a prophet, I don't think, whatever, right? Whatever title you want to call Daniel, he would not have written about these things if First Enoch was not canon. And what I mean by that is Daniel wouldn't have used these unique phrases that could only have been found in First Enoch. Daniel wouldn't have invented those phrases and started using them, right? If none of the other canon texts of the time used them. If you look throughout the Tanakh, you do not find a disparity, if that's the right term, where, different authors of each book just invent unique terms that you don't see elsewhere, right? So my logical observation is that for Daniel to be canon, since he used these unique terms, he must have been using them on a basis, okay? Because you can't just come out and write a new book like Daniel did in his time and put in a whole bunch of very specific and unique terms like Ancient of Days, naming angels. You can't just come out there out of the woodwork and do that and expect all of Israel and Judaism, very orthodox and all that at the time, you know what I mean? Back then, at the time, like I'm talking about, you couldn't just write a book like that and them accept you. You might be severely punished for trying to create some type of pseudo work, right? But yet Daniel is considered canon back then until now, right? So since Daniel is canon, then when Daniel, or whoever wrote it arguably, wrote that book, and whenever it was written between 1 and 600 BC, whoever wrote it, whenever it was written in that time frame, they must have only used those key phrases because the people were familiar with the usage of those phrases in other canon texts. And as I said, you don't find those phrases elsewhere in Tanakh. So that supports the concept that they must have come from another text that was once canon, but over time became lost or separated from the canon. Now, for people to say, oh, well, you're just claiming this and that's a wild claim. If we look at the Tanakh, it quotes and references a number of books that are no longer in the Tanakh. Okay? I think Jubilees is one of them. There's a whole pile of them. Everybody knows this. Okay? And that's why scholars have tried to say, oh, well, those books don't exist anymore because they've been amalgamated together into the currently existing books. I've heard all sorts of different theories. None of them really can be proven. The fact is, it directly quotes and references other books which are not in the Bible anymore. Okay? So that alone is proof that there were once books that were canon that are no longer in the tangible canon that we still possess. So on that logical notion, First Enoch, which we do actually possess copies of from the Dead Sea Scrolls, that legitimizes First Enoch as a candidate for a canon text. And in my longer videos on my channel from like a year ago that I keep referencing, I go into great detail and read the quotes and sources and all that. It's amazing evidence, okay, as to the age of the book First Enoch. But keeping it simple for here, Daniel is canon. If Daniel is canon, he only used those key terms that are unique to Daniel in First Enoch because First Enoch was canon. First Enoch, if it's real, would have been one of the first books written, or it would be the first book written 1,000 or 2,000, whatever years before Moses wrote the first books of what we now have as the Tanakh. So if the whole story about First Enoch is real, okay, and it's a real deal thing, then of course we don't have the original translation. They didn't even speak ancient Hebrew back then. They spoke Paleo Hebrew, and First Enoch was before that. So First Enoch was probably written by Enoch, if it's real, in some ancient language that's no longer used, been lost to time most likely. I mean, we know Paleo Hebrew exists, but it's like a dead and extinct language. Even in the time of Ezra, if I'm not mistaken, Paleo Hebrew was becoming a lost language or an unused language. Okay, when they found the scrolls, like it details in Tanakh, I think it's in Ezra or Nehemiah or whatever, they found these scrolls in the temple and the people couldn't understand them. And the scribes had to read them, go over them, and read them to the people. Okay, and I've postulated, but I can't prove, perhaps it was written in Paleo Hebrew. You know what I mean? That's why they couldn't understand it. I don't know, right? But the point is that First Enoch was definitely written originally in a different and older language that's no longer used, that probably predated Paleo-Hebrew. It probably got transcribed and written down again in different languages over the thousands of years. And by the time we got to the little fragments that are in the Qumran scrolls, they're written in whatever more modern language it was, whether it's ancient Hebrew or maybe there are some Paleo-Hebrew ones and maybe some Greek ones, I don't know, but more modern languages. That's just, you can't, just because you found those ones doesn't mean that older ones didn't exist. I mean, before they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, they couldn't date most of the books of the Bible as old as they do now that they have the Dead Sea Scrolls. I mean, one day before they found the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Qumran caves and all that, you wouldn't be able to say certain things. The next day, we found these scrolls. Once they, could date them, they probably couldn't do that right away. Then they realized, you know what I mean? So, in all fairness, the original First Enoch could have been real, could have been written in an older language over time, different languages. The surviving copy. I mean, let's look at it this way. The Tanakh is got lots of books. The Tanakh was written allegedly starting back in like Moses' time, 13 or 1500 BC, whatever it was. The prophets started around 800 BC, going all the way up to around 400 BC. If these books are written by so many people over such a long period of time, and believers believe, that's how old those texts are, then we have to accept that prior to the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest copies of any Tanakh book that we had dated from the Common Era. Okay? Some of them from 500 to 1000 AD or CE. There weren't any from BC. The Septuagint doesn't exist in its original form anywhere. There's nothing older than that. Okay? When they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, they found copies of all the biblical books, and they can be dated between 1 and 300 BC. Now, that is still way off the mark from when they were allegedly written, but that's much better than what we had before as ascertainable proof. So that's my point again, reestablished, that before the day of the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the day before, nobody can make those claims pertaining to the actual provable age of the Tanakh books. Someone could claim the Tanakh books are written after Jesus. You know what I mean? And the skeptics of the time would have to agree. Well, there's no, or is it the other way around? But you see my point, right? So there's all reason to believe that First Enoch, since it is quoted and its terms and phrases, its unique terms and phrases are quoted by Daniel and used by Daniel, that shows that obviously and clearly First Enoch was canon in the time of Daniel when he wrote his book. And that's why he used those terms and phrases, because that would be justifiable for the congregation of Israel. Like I said, you can't come out there with a new book using new terms and phrases, which might intimidate people. Ancient of Days, is that another deity other than God? You know what I mean? All these things people might say. So, but if the people of the time did have First Enoch and consider it canon, if Daniel was to write that book and use those phrases, it wouldn't shock them, bewilder them, and cause them to have doubt on Daniel. They would believe Daniel because, yes, he's using the same phrases as First Enoch. First Enoch has eschatology, if that's the right pronunciation, talks about end days stuff, like the book of Revelation does. It's about end days events. Now, there's very little of that in the whole of the Tanakh. So in like 1,000 pages of Tanakh, there's very, very little. You could probably fit it on a few pages where it has end days material. First Enoch has got a lot of end days material, but so does the book of Daniel. Okay, the book of Daniel is devoted to end days material, similar to the book of First Enoch. So is it coincidental that if First Enoch was canon and Daniel was using key terms from it, obviously Daniel had read First Enoch, obviously Daniel and the people believed First Enoch was canon, and hence they believed the end days eschatology from First Enoch, and that's why Daniel incorporated end days eschatology in his book. Okay, that was obviously his inspiration, was First Enoch. Okay, that's why First Enoch and Daniel talk about the coming of Messiah at the end of days and the great judgment. Well, these major themes that aren't discussed at all or often at all in the whole rest of the Tanakh. Okay, it all makes a lot more sense. Right? If you go look at carbon dating and all this and that, they'll say, First Enoch, only some of the books can be dated BC. A lot of the books of First Enoch are dated AD. whatever. That's from the fragments that you have and what we have right now. But that's why logic is the best tool. Because, like I said, you don't need carbon dating to look at the, well, you did to date the scrolls that they found of Daniel. But beside the point, common sense tells you what I just presented here, right? Daniel said those things because it was canon knowledge at the time. Now, what this leads to is that first Enoch was canon, which I believe it is. Okay, we may not have the best translations of it, even into English. In the translation that we had in the scrolls, may not even be the one we have in the scrolls. Might be a little bit different from what the original was, as everything changes a little bit over time, even in the Tanakh. When you cross languages and cross so much time, one little scribal error, meanings and this and that can change. My point is that if First Enoch is canon, then the material in First Enoch, considering all of it, is extremely important in validating the Christian type concepts of Jesus as Messiah. Okay, because the Christian concept of Messiah also lines up with Qumran Scroll 11Q13. Okay, but I'm not here to argue that's canon. That's just a Targum or Midrash or something. Anyways, it's just somebody's opinion. But First Enoch is a dedicated book, right? So First Enoch's canon, then all the material that it talks about with the Son of Man, with the Anointed One, aka Messiah, there's a few of those. There's a lot of mentions of the Elect One, which is clearly the Messiah figure. And you read about all those mentions. Again, I have a very long video where I go through all these quotes and I read them. It's on my channel under my live stream videos from about a year ago. When you read through all these, is clearly very Christian-like, okay? Because one of the differences with the Christian concept of Messiah and the Jewish concept of Messiah is that the Jewish concept of Messiah is he comes once and for all at the end of days, and you can't kill him. He won't die or fail in his mission. That's why they view Jesus as illegitimate, because he failed to unite the world and create a world of peace and bring heaven on, that goodness here on earth. He instead got beaten up in, shameful fashion, put to death and all of that, right? So in that sense, they view Jesus as a failure. Christians always say in response, oh, but he's coming back at the end of days, right? Well, the irony here, the ironic thing is if you took away Jesus's first coming and just had him arrive at the end of days, then technically Jews and Christians will both look at him as the one Messiah, right? So the problem rests with why did he come 2,000 years early? I just wanted to point that out. But the thing with first, and that's a whole nother conversation for another time. I don't know why I got into that. But First Enoch, it talks about all these concepts, like how the Messiah was there at like the creation time for this earth, that he didn't just show up once on this planet, or that he won't just show up once on this planet at the end of days. That's my point. First, so I did mention it for a reason. First Enoch lays out this, history of the Messiah and mythos of the Messiah, how he's supremely ancient. He was the elect one appointed by God for this, cosmic type duty and all of that. So it's not just he's a really nice guy who shows up at the end of days, sent by God, or just fully human and whatever that, different Jewish people believe. At the end of the day, First Enoch, if it's real, it paves the way for what is now understood to be as the Christian concept of the Messiah, where it's more like a primordial Messiah who incarnated here on this earth to fulfill a mission fully as a man. Now, he might be fully man up in the heavens, right? So it's not like he was something else and became a person, but he took on mortality. That's the key difference. So I fully believe he was human looking up in the heavens in his prior elect role, and he incarnated to come down here. And according to Judaism, it's not forbidden for an angel to incarnate as the Messiah, but the Messiah has to be fully human. The Messiah cannot be God. The Messiah cannot be something else. It can't be something transformed into a human. That would be deception and all this. For it to be fair game, the Messiah has to be here as a human. They cannot legally exclude an angel incarnating as a human. But it can't just be any angel. It has to be an important one. So if he is this primordial, Son of God, Son of Man, appointed elect one from the dawn of time, I've always argued maybe he was the first ever created in the human image, and that's why he feels this responsibility, or he's um, tasked with looking after humans that bear his resemblance. You know what I mean? Whether I can prove that or not, I certainly don't have time for right now. But it's completely, even according to Judaism, it should be perfectly legitimate for a special, important angel whose elected task is such to incarnate, probably only if necessary. If no humans are capable of pulling it off, you know what I mean? None of the humans were good enough amidst Israel or the Gentiles, and maybe, and because God cares, he don't want everybody to fester away, he's gonna be like, okay, well, you need it that badly, I'll send somebody down. It's not gonna be nobody, it's not gonna be Bob from Andromeda Galaxy, it's gonna be my appointed son, the elect one, who is here governing over with creation, and watching over you and leading you all from day one anyways, without you even knowing it. I'm going to send him down here but he's going to have to incarnate as one of you to keep everything fair. That's why Jesus didn't save himself. He wasn't a coward. He didn't run away. He faced Satan. He faced his trials, and he faced his death and went with it. Why? Because it wasn't a kamikaze mission. It's because the people opposed him and put him to death, right? And like I've said many times before, if the Messiah has to be like a son of man, then he should be able to suffer and die and be opposed. Judaism likes to say, oh, when the Messiah comes, he's going to be fully human. But then they throw in all that other, it's true of Jesus at the end of days. Don't get pretzeled up here. But if you want to say the Messiah is fully human, then you have to admit that he could be rejected, suffer, and die. Even in the Talmud and other texts in Judaism, they say that the Messiah will be rejected by many and he won't be acknowledged at first, right? But these are people's opinions, and that doesn't really matter too much, right? The point is that if he's going to be fully human, then he can't go running around doing superpowers, saving himself from death and all of that. That's why Jesus died miserably on the cross and said, God, why have you forsaken me? Because God wasn't standing there whispering in his ear saying, hey, I'm going to save you. You know what I mean? Jesus was left there to die miserably like any other human would be. He didn't take himself down off the cross. He didn't heal himself, even though he healed so many other people. He didn't do any of that. Why? Because that'd be cheating, right? He had to pass the test against all temptation in his life, against the adversary itself trying to tempt him. Once he passed that test, he went around teaching the gospel, which is the reform from sin in order to be saved, as Enoch teaches. And he did that despite all the opposition, and then he got put to death. So he went out like a human. He lived like a human. He went out like a human. Yeah, he did some miracles, but he didn't do them. God did them, right? Elijah did miracles. Other prophets of Tanakh did miracles. Jesus wasn't the only person to do miracles. Doing miracles doesn't disqualify you from anything. If anything, it can qualify you for something, right? So anyways, that's my point. First Enoch, if real, does validate Jesus as the Messiah. Without First Enoch, there's a lot less evidence that Christians can put to the table to say that, hey, to a universal audience, that, hey, Jesus is the real deal. If you take First Enoch away, then all that Son of Man, the elect one, the anointed one, all those verses and references and concepts from First Enoch and end days eschatology concepts are just vaporized away, and you have like next to nothing, in comparison to try and validate Jesus. There's very little in Tanakh that validates Jesus. There's Daniel 9, there's Isaiah 53. Those require deep arguments if you're debating with Judaism. But the point is, there's not very much in Tanakh that a Christian could even use to validate Jesus. There's nowhere in Tanakh where it says that Messiah is going to show up 2,000 years early. Nothing like that. It takes a lot of deep discussion and debate, okay, to cover all those things. But when you bring in First Enoch to the picture, you got so much more material there that paves all the way for so many concepts in the New Testament. That's my point. That's why for Christians it's important to understand why First Enoch is canon. And when you hear the skeptics say, oh, but First Enoch, all those Messiah verses and blah, 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 those are written in the common era. That means after Jesus, which means it's all fake, and that Christians just wrote it to make everything fake and make people believe in Jesus. That's what they claim. That's what the skeptics claim. What most scholars claim, because most scholars are skeptics and they're not believers, right? And the only way to combat that is with logic, like I said, because none of those scholars have looked into the blatant facts that I discovered in Daniel, that Daniel quotes First Enoch. So, you know what I mean? Only when they do that will they comprehend, oh, yeah, that's pretty logical. if Daniel quoted Enoch, then Enoch must be canon in Daniel's time. Not only that, like I said, at worst, it was contemporary to Daniel. Maybe maybe First Enoch wasn't written by Enoch. Maybe some other guy wrote it in the time of Daniel. Worst case scenario. But it had to be at least written in the time of Daniel. At best, and most likely, it was written before Daniel, right? And in one of my longer videos on my channel, the longer live streams on First Enoch from about a year ago, I show, where was it? Talking about the age. It just completely zipped out of my brain. I got to get going because somebody's waiting for me. So anyways, take care, folks, and God bless.